Hey, and welcome to the Prism of Perspective podcast. It's where we're going to look at how our beliefs, the energy we generate, and our ability to stay present to the challenges in our lives determine the quality of the life and the way that we're able to engage and impact the world. Today, I'm super excited to have a great friend of mine, Sandy Strader, with us. And as soon as I thought about the idea of having this podcast, she was one of the first persons that came to my mind, particularly because I've known her for a little over a decade and I've just watched her gracefully handle all kinds of big challenges. And I want to have a conversation with her about how she does that with a recognition, like all of us, it's kind of like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, right? So we're not talking about that you handle it with perfection, but how do you use the tools that are available? How do you develop the tools that are available so that you can have the life that you love? So right now I'd like to introduce you to my friend Sandy. Sandy, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you think would be important for us to know?
Okay. Thank you, John. I appreciate that introduction. It makes me proud of the storms I've walked through over the last decade. So thank you.
It has been raining on occasion.
It has. It's been a shit show on occasion. I am 50 years old. I have a 14-year-old son. I live in Brooklyn, New York. And well, he'll be 14 next month. And I work full time as a mental health coach for a company. We coach a lot of the big tech industry, etc. industries. And I also have a small private practice.
Cool deal. So you know that we're going to be talking a little bit about the Prism of Perspective and how it engages your world. And like all of us, you've had different storms that have come up in your life and had to engage with them. So why don't you talk to me about, like, where do you think we would really gain the most from beginning? What part of your life do you say, hey, here's a place where, as you said, there was a bit of a shit show and we had to figure out how we're going to handle the curveballs coming at us?
Well, I mean, it started early for me, and I know we don't have to go all the way back, but I think the train went off the track at quite a young age, and I started recognizing that, I guess around, I would say 36, 35, when I found out I was pregnant, unexpectedly. Wasn't really.
You know how that happens, right?
Yes, I do now.
Okay.
Yes, I got pregnant and was not in a love relationship of any sort, and made the decision. That was cold water in the face when you're faced with a big decision like that. Whether or not to have a biological child was the question at that moment. I had planned on adopting because my favorite person in my world grew up in an orphanage, my maternal grandfather, and, during the Great Depression. And so growing up as a child, all my doll babies were adopted, because I knew my grandpa was in an orphanage. I was basically trying to save a kid from an orphanage. Grandpa was never adopted. Yeah, wherever I could. So he actually aged out and moved out of the orphanage. So he was never adopted. So that struck me as a young child. So I wanted to go adopt children. And that was kind of my goal. I figured I would do that around 40, but then ended up having a child at 36. And I could tell that I was attracting the wrong things in my life. And I kept having challenges, and they were never just like little challenges. They were always giant challenges. And I knew that I was the problem, if you will.
So let's kind of go back to you kind of finding out, right? So in the Prism of Perspective, one of the things we say is, what we believe to be true filters all of the different stimuli that are out there, right? There's billions of bits of information that we'd be looking at, but our senses can only pick up about 120 bits at a time. And so because of that, our beliefs are basically creating a confirmation bias, right? We're creating that which we're looking for. And you mentioned briefly, you said, it started really young for you, having some challenges. And so you want to dive into that a little bit to give us a frame of reference where you might feel that, what created your early filters for you?
Well, I was raised by two alcoholic parents who had me very, very young. And they tried to create a reality for me that I like to joke that that my first words were, I don't think this is right. They rubbed against my intuition about life. And it was quite traumatic, actually. They were very abusive, physically, verbally. And I moved out on my 18th birthday. I was a senior in high school and never moved back home and never received any help of any sort from them.
So let's just think about how that might impact somebody, right? You, anybody else. So you have this situation, you come into a family, the parents are incapable, right? That they didn't have the skill set necessarily to really raise a child. It sounds like what they were trying to do is compress you or hold you, constrain you into their vision of what they wanted so that, you would fulfill what it was they were looking for. But you are this individual human being with an expression of yourself, and you're kind of pushing out against what's going on. And so when I listen to that, I think, okay, so that's going to develop some beliefs like, the world is dangerous. I have to fight back. I need to be strong.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
A little bit of a kind of like, if I don't fight back, I'm going to disappear.
That's right.
And so you begin this situation where the people that are supposed to be caring for you are actually being somewhat violent toward you, not just verbally, but also physically. And they're trying to constrain you, knock you into something that you're not. And you're like, this is not what's going on. So because that's the first real relationships that you have, right? Your parents, then you tend to map that onto the world. So how do you think that map impacted other relationships? How do you think that need to fight for who you are might have showed up other places?
Well, I mean, I think it, I don't know exactly where we're going with this, but
me neither. Let's go.
All right. I think it served me well when I, started applying for jobs. Right. I was friendly. I had a soft look about me, but I was assertive, and I got every job I wanted.
So you had to fend for yourself. So fending for yourself was not a new thing. In other words, some kids come out after being helicopter parented and they don't have any skills, they don't have any capabilities. You really had to raise yourself essentially in a really difficult situation. So it made you more self-dependent, things along those lines. So there's pluses and minuses to everything. Not that we're suggesting that it was a great way to come into the world, but you take what you get, right? And so based on that, you have this world like, I have to care for myself is kind of what I'm hearing. I have to be able to take care of myself. And also at some level, I'm guessing you probably, even though you were fighting back against your parents, you're probably trying to figure out what is it that I can do that's going to not have terrible circumstances today, right? I don't want to trigger anything. Is that true, or did I make that up?
No, you're right. I mean, I absolutely, there was a people-pleasing tendencies to keep the peace in all situations and never to upset anyone. And then I also knew that if I did upset someone, I needed to win, right? That was part of my survival technique as well.
Yep. So you kind of pleased, but you had your defensiveness ready, right? Or your offensiveness, your strike back, right?
I was the first to break up, get out, don't trust people, get as much as you can out of the situation or relationship.
Okay. So let's kind of talk about what that sounds like, right? So you had some fighter in you, right? Mm-hmm. You had a little bit you were able to kind of walk, if we look at the different levels of energy, right? So we talk a low level victim. Doesn't really sound like you had a lot of victim to you, right? You weren't like, I can't do anything. You were like, I have to do something. I got to fight back. And then you also had a little bit of the negotiator contributor, right? I'm going to get what I need to get, but I can people please when I have to. So you could kind of move your energy levels through there pretty effectively. Mm-hmm. Does that sound right? And then you go into the world and you start getting some of your jobs. You have some success in your jobs, partly because you have the ability to be a chameleon, right? I know how I need to show up for this difference, so somebody perceives something. And so in some levels, that energy level was working for you, right? Now we get a little
reinforce that,
right?
Yes.
So reinforce the way I see the world is the way it is. You're not really thinking, wow, there's this unlimited opportunity. You're still thinking, I got to care for myself. I got to fight myself. I got to present myself in a particular way. so that I'm able to manage whatever comes, because you've already had some experiences, like some bad stuff can happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
So here you are really kind of playing in that game, and then you mature through a couple different roles, and then you have a situation where all of a sudden at 36 you find yourself, hey, I got something coming at me that I wasn't really planning for. So tell me how you reacted immediately. Like, did you automatically go into I got this, or holy shit? Like what kind of came up for you?
Oh, definitely. Holy shit.
Were there like exclamation points after that, or was it just like a quiet?
Yeah.
So we really brought the holy shit, huh?
Yeah. I mean, really just train off the track. What am I going to do? Do I want it back on the track? Do I want to find a different set of tracks? Just a lot of soul searching. What could I do? What were my options?
And so at this time, the gentleman that had left that gift for you on the toilet seat, talk to me about that. Like, how was that? Is he really a supportive human being, or?
Oh, stop it, John. Is he? No, he and I were friends for a few months, and he completely, absolutely, he was very, what is the word I'm looking for? Decisive, and, let me know that he was, not interested at all. He gave me countdowns on different forms of abortions I could have, 3 more
It's
days.
helpful, right?
Decide. Very helpful. Yeah, he would text those to me. And he said absolutely did not want to be in my life whatsoever if I decided to move forward with the pregnancy.
And how did that affect your decision?
It actually it had made quite an impact, because at that point I decided, okay, I could, live with something I would regret, which was my belief at that time around an abortion for myself. Mm-hmm. I would have to live with that, or I could have a child, not have to adopt one. I'm already pregnant. And this guy has opted out.
Right. So it's kind of like putting you in the place you thought you'd be at 40. You just got there, right, a little early.
It ended up being a win-win there for a few months. And
so fortunately, he went away and he's never been a challenge again?
Right. I wish. No, I shouldn't say that. Although I probably believe that.
Tell me more about that.
I certainly had the child. He came back into my life with curiosity around the child. And then he has been a very difficult, I know the word narcissist gets thrown around a lot, but when you actually, realize what a narcissist is, and I like to think of it as you can't look out the window without your reflection getting in the way.
Interesting way of saying that, right?
Full-blown narcissist, and that's not just my opinion, but some professionals as well.
So let's stop for a second. So what we have this gentleman who is the father of your child, and he says, I'm not going to be involved. But then once you decide to move forward, he says, hey, I'm coming back into your world. And he comes back in not as a person really thinking about how do I add value, but what can I extract from this for myself? How do I make this situation best for me is really the frame of reference. Makes it a little difficult to co-parent with somebody, huh?
Yes, to this day. I'd like to say that his hate or disdain for me is greater than his love for our son. And he loves our son, and however that works for him. But he can't be kind to our son if there's an opportunity to hurt me by behaving differently. Okay. So he will always choose harming me or my finances over the cost of my son's time or feelings or emotions.
Okay. So let's go back into how this lands for you. So you had this feeling like the world is dangerous, right? People are out for themselves. You got to defend yourself. And then a big life event occurs and you get some reinforcement. Yep, I was right all along. People are self-interested. They're trying to use me to just fit into their world in a particular way. Yes. And so it kind of reinforces that. It puts you in a situation where you continue at some level to feel like dangerous world. I got to protect myself. Scarce resources, right? There's not enough for everybody. I'm kind of fighting for what I got. How do you move out of that? How do you evolve to a place where you're not bitter and angry and fighting all the time?
I haven't figured that out yet.
I'm sorry. We got to get someone else on our podcast. No, I'm teasing.
I mean, there's so many answers there.
Where do you feel like you began to get some traction?
Well, I had to first notice that, in my, being a victim, right? Because you're victimized by these things when they come into your life, right? Initially, right? That's kind of like the gut reaction is,
first thing,
why me, right? And on some levels, when you're, after you have several of these experiences, you're like, I'm attracting this. So I was on some level still seeing the world, the scarcity, all the things you just said, and attracted this. I'll call him a dude. I think you're a gentleman, and that it doesn't work.
That was a bit of a stretch for you. Can't quite get there.
We can call him a dude. How's that? An educated dude, but a dude nonetheless. So I first had to realize my role in it, right?
Right. So began to accept a little more responsibility, right? Rather than blaming, right? Blaming is often easy in the moment, but harder over time, right? As long as you give away your power, feels great to say someone else is responsible, but at the end of the day, you're still sitting in your shit, right? It doesn't do you any good. It's not like you go, oh, thank God I blamed that person. Now everything's better.
Absolutely. And think about that. So since I had a very, very messed up first 18 years, it was easy for me to fall back into that. I lost my train of thought there.
Yeah, but that I think that's the thing that we all have to be aware of, right? So we have these ingrained pathways, right?
Right. So I'm using that as an excuse, though. So I remember at 36, now I'm 18 plus 18.
Right.
How long am I going to continue blaming my parents for my fucked up life?
Okay.
Are we allowed to say that?
We just did.
So how long can I keep blaming my parents? Yes,
right.
That was terrible. Yes, that was traumatic. Yes, that was awful. I survived it. Now, what am I going to do with that education, so that I'm not a victim for myself and for others? What am I going to do with that knowledge of how to survive that type of childhood and how I can roll that into some resiliency in life? How can I create a pause and not keep defaulting to those old neural pathways of, being victimized as a child?
So let's kind of dive into the Prism for session here. So a little bit we were talking about beliefs at the beginning, right? Now a little bit of what I'm hearing is you're going to have some energy. You have to have some energy if you're going to exert something, right? So we'll talk about like maybe some of the habits that you have that generate energy for you. And then the other piece is, how present are we, right? So in other words, stuff happens and we can just react and blame and be stuck in the kind of, I had no choice in this, or you can begin to have that space. And you had mentioned, like stuff comes up. There's a guy named Mark Goulston who wrote a book called Just Listen. And he talks about this space and he says, everybody can go from oh shit to okay in a couple of weeks, right? Or some a couple of months and some maybe a couple of years. But he goes, but people that are world-class can do it in a couple of minutes. And so the way that he describes it, he says, the first thing you're going to do is be authentic with yourself. Something bad that you perceive to be bad, it's okay to say, I perceive this to be bad at this instant, right? So he's like, shit, right? But then where do you go with that? And so the next thing he works to is he says, you got to lighten it up a little bit. You're like, geez. He goes, because how bad can OGs be? Right. And then you're like, okay, so you're slowing it down a little bit. You're like, okay, oh God, give me some help. Right. So I like the serenity prayer, or God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Great to say it. Right. So I grew up Catholic. I can say All Father and Hail Mary really, really quick, but you kind of actually have to think about what you're saying. So God grant me the serenity, the peace to accept the things I cannot change, right? At the moment, you're like, okay, so here's what's going on. I got this stuff going on. The courage to accept the things to change the things I can, right? So it's not about I'm just going to accept life. I'm going to accept what's real, but then I'm going to impact it. And then I have the wisdom to know the difference, right? And that's kind of what we're talking about in that space, right? We're trying to expand the space between stimulus and response so that we can do that. And if we can learn to default to that behavior, to thinking about it in that way, then we can become the world-class people that get to move from frustration into a great space in a brief period of time. But it's going to be about how are we handling that space? If our default is it's his fault or her fault or their fault or the world's fault, then we might be able to point out, but we're not changing our lives. If instead we say, kind of work through that process, lots of different ways to do it. That's one of the ways we can do it. Now we're back in power. Right. So now we think about, okay, we talked about our beliefs, and initially, you were exposed to a world that was dangerous, right? You were exposed to a world that was harsh, right? That was trying to compress you or change you or make you be different. And so we had to find ways to evolve. Talk to me about what you do. Like when I look at creating or generating energy, I talk about, the way we eat, what we exercise, our positive psychology practices, which would include sleep and meditation and mindfulness. And then also the ability to kind of find your space and get into flow so that you can roll on an ongoing basis. Tell me what your behaviors are. What are your practices that you do now that enable you to engage the world with a level of energy so you can activate your positive beliefs, so that you can be present in the moment? What are some of the things that you find that you do that really add value to your life as far as daily habits?
Fantastic. I feel like I could use some, that's judgment, but I feel like I could use some more. But right now I am regularly dropping into my breath. Mm-hmm. And that has become just part of me.
I think I have a pretty good feel for what. Tell us, for someone who may not know what that means. So they're listening and they're like, well, how do I drop into my breath? What do I do?
So when I talk to my clients about it, I say, just pick I'm trying to practice mindful awareness by dropping into my breath, into the present moment. So, I start off by explaining it, try to at least invite them to try it at least in the morning and night, and then maybe set an alarm or something, or remember to do it at noon, or Post-it note. And what that looks like for me is why I like to do it a few times a day is I feel like it's a way to sprinkle mindful awareness organically throughout each day versus like put it on a 20-minute to-do list on my list that's already full. So for me, that is, dropping into 3 cycles of breath, 6 yoga count in, 6 yoga count out, paying attention to where inhale becomes exhale and exhale becomes inhale. And as my mind gets pulled away, I just simply notice that it got pulled away and I return to the breath. And in those 3 cycles of breath, I might have 200 opportunities to return to the breath. And sometimes I might only have 10 opportunities to return to the breath. But I do that in a space of non-judgment. So one is not better than the other. If I get 200 opportunities or 10 opportunities, it's just that helps me not only ground in the present moment, but it helps me practice non-judgment as well. So everything that's happening throughout our day, every day we have a judgment of it. Mm-hmm.
So let me jump in too. I think an additional benefit to that. So one of the things I get a kick out of is, some like your particular breath approach. I think you would agree with me. That's your particular breath approach. Like someone else will say, oh, I do 4-7-8 or I do vagal breathing. Yeah. I think the big thing that we want to agree on is that being mindful and being aware and pulling our focus so that we're not distracted, and whatever breath you're doing, most likely that's not really probably the one that you're looking for, but it's really about paying attention to the breath work. And then the other side of it is, in addition to what we're doing psychologically and emotionally, we are literally allowing our breath to inform our bodies that everything's okay. Because when you slow your breathing down like that, you're sending a message like, hey, there is actually no saber-toothed tiger here. Otherwise, I would be hyperventilating. So if I'm slowing it down, I'm doing, whatever style of breathing you're doing, you're kind of sending that biological message, like everything's okay. And so,
Absolutely.
so one of the things I think is important too is, sometimes we look at these things and you're like, every time somebody's like, yeah, when I get stressed, I do that. And I said, well, what's your practice around it when you're not stressed? Oh, I just do it when I'm stressed. It's like, oh, that's cool. That's like going out and running a marathon during the race. You're like, oh, I'm going to go run a marathon on Saturday. You might want to practice that. And so doing breath work, like you said, sprinkling it throughout your day. Then when something big comes up and it's not on your calendar, it's not on your alarm or whatever, but all of a sudden you're a little stressed, you know how to deal with it, right? You're like, oh, cool. I know how to do this. I'm doing my breath work. I'm going to get it back. It's a skill, right? It's a capability that brings you back.
It's like playing piano. You don't want to just start practicing the piano 2 minutes before you get called on stage. You want to have the skill.
Right. Yeah, well said. Yeah.
When life throws me curveballs, my life has given me a lot of opportunity to practice dealing with curveballs. So now when a curveball comes my way, I pause and drop into the breath like it's my job.
Because at some level, it is your job, right? It is your job to show up for life. And if you're allowing,
I like it or not,
if you're allowing yourself to be in fight or flight, right? What you're saying is like, I'm going to go out into the world incapacitated, right? I'm going to go out as a person that has less intellectual and creative capabilities than I have. I'm just going to give it away. Or you can slow it down and say, I'm going to reconnect with my higher self, slow it down, and now I have all the resources available. Does that make sense?
That's where our power lies, in the present moment, not last moment or next moment, but in the present moment. So when I think about you're right, everything, any kind of breath style, box breathing, whatever style anyone uses, I also make my practice around all things water related. And I teach my clients that too, because it's just something else that can remind you to practice being in the present moment. And so for me, that is waiting for the shower to get hot enough to jump in. There's that sweet spot that you're looking for before you jump in, right? You don't want to waste water because we're conscientious about the planet. We don't want to get in too early. So that gives me an opportunity. I often like to reheat my coffee in the microwave for 30 seconds. I used to try to do 10 things in those 30 seconds. Now I'll step off to the side and drop into my breath. When I'm washing my hands in New York, the water actually comes out cold, unlike in Florida. So you wait for that to heat up to get a good hand washing. And, I drop into the breath there. So anything that you can do to remind yourself to practice living in the present moment, because we have quick opinions of all things that come at us. I've made a really nice earthy green smoothie recently, and somehow in my little NutriBullet, somehow the cap just wasn't quite on right, and I dropped it. And when it hit the kitchen floor, it shot up in such a way that the green smoothie got all over the ceiling and everywhere.
Quite a drop.
What's that?
So quite a drop, huh?
Yes, it was just, and it was, you're always in a hurry, right? You're grabbing the smoothie, running back to session or doing whatever. And my son was home, and immediately I saw it hit, I saw it spray my beautiful white ceiling, and I just paused real quick and I went, well, that just happened, because it was the most neutral, factual statement that I could make that wasn't shaming, damning, blaming him or anyone,
embracing reality, right? It did happen, right?
It just freaking happened.
Yep. And then
it isn't convenient. I could lose my cool over it, but I had my son was watching me when it happened. So it was like one of those, winning moments, because all of a sudden all that came out of my mouth was that just happened, versus, a curse word, which he's heard before, or being mad at myself. I'm showing him, leading by example, on how he, can react to himself when he makes a mistake. Yep. Clearly it was a mistake to drop the freaking smoothie in the first place, but It happened whether I
Yeah,
wanted it
it
or
did. There
not.
was like, you weren't going to undo that in any way, right? That it
Yep,
had already
it
occurred.
happened.
So one of the things you talked about is breath work. What are some of the other practices? You said you could do a better job with some of the other ones. What do you find yourself doing, or what do you find yourself wanting to add?
But one thing I think I do well, but it's like it feels like swimming against the current sometimes, is practicing non-judgment. I think that's big.
Hmm.
And what that looks like for me, we tend to judge in areas where we hold shame or have shame. So I'll just be walking outside in Brooklyn and I'll see somebody, right? And for example, I'll see somebody in a woman in white pants, and my immediate default in my brain is she shouldn't be wearing those white pants, or oh, she doesn't look good in those white pants. And when I hear myself judge somebody, I do a quick check and I'm like, where do you hold shame, Sandy? And it's kind of a fun little thing I do with myself. And I immediately I recall the white pants that I bought that never looked good on me, that I spent the money on and then gave away and wasted my money, right? And then the second pair of white pants a decade later that I bought and did the exact same thing and gave away because I don't look good in white pants. So therefore I have a little shame around that, right? Somewhere in
Right.
there.
So a lot. So I think what I think I hear you saying is beyond the white pants. It's really just we tend to project, right? We make up stories. We
Mhm.
judge things rather than just kind of allowing them to be, right? We're trying, in some ways, this is an extreme example, but that's what your parents were trying to do, right? They were judging and they were trying to control you. And in smaller ways, we do the same thing with our lives. This is not the way it should be, therefore it should be other. And instead, what you're saying, if I have the time, if I'm aware that I don't try and control everything, I can't control everything.
I
I
don't. I
can
just lean in with
embrace.
curiosity
Yeah.
around why the hell am I judging this woman
Right.
for walking down the street? Like, who am I? I'm out walking my dog and finding stuff to judge. And I think we all do it. And I think noticing that we do it and pausing and just getting, get friendly, get curious with yourself and ask, why am I doing this? Because I don't have to. I can
Right.
just go out and be.
So a practice that you're having is really, it comes back in a way to this, to the same thing, expand the space between stimulus and response.
Yeah.
And rather than instinctively or reactively judging something, just kind of allowing it to be, allowing your judgment to drop so you can actually observe what's there and again, embrace reality and deal with it. So
Yeah.
talking about embracing reality, I want to go to another curveball that we haven't discussed. So here we are, you're 36 years old. So do you have your son at 36 or 37?
I had him at 36.
Okay. So 36 years old. And if I'm correct, you got some other big news around 42.
Yes, yes. And he was 6 when I was 42, when I got diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer and was told that my cortisol was high and I'm supposed to now approach life and not allow my cortisol to get jacked up.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Uh,
And so what's your immediate response? So here you are, you're co-parenting with dude. That's a
Dude,
little difficult to co-parent with. And you have a 6-year-old son, and you
mhm.
find out that you have stage 3 breast cancer. So I would count that as a curveball. So how'd you hit that one?
Yeah. Well, immediately, your thoughts, I think no matter what you're practicing, is there's just so much fear, right? It was a layer of that curveball was that my dad had just been diagnosed in August. I got diagnosed in September and of that year, and his was stage 4 after the PET scan. And now I have a PET scan, a looming, they know it's stage 3. I have a looming PET scan to tell me if it's stage 4. Um, so that was freak out time, right? I was freaking out. There was, but boy, you're right. When you were talking about how it triggers all that old stuff, all those old beliefs around what the world is like. And, um,
So how do you hit that ball? Because I
that ball.
remember that obviously it was a big threatening challenging time.
Mm-hmm.
What were the tools that you relied upon that helped you to move through it?
Well, obviously, aside from the external factors like leaning on my friends and everybody turning into a researcher and scientist and supporting me and loving on me, helping me make big, important decisions, I started taking a mindfulness class and tried to slow down my thinking because I didn't want to accept reality. And that's what I was pushing against.
Okay. And oddly enough, mindfulness is kind of about accepting reality, right?
Right. So that's why I had to take the course twice. Because I really, after 8 weeks, I was like,
you were like, I took the course and I still have this damn cancer.
Still pissed about the cancer. So I didn't get anything. I felt like I was still at the end of the course where I was at the beginning. So I paid and took it a second time. And somewhere during that second time, I realized the judgment piece was in my way. The guru who was teaching the course, a retired neurologist, he, or neurosurgeon or something, retired guy, and he kept saying, oh, just be with the thoughts, allow the thoughts to be. And I'm like, every time I allow the thoughts to be, I'm still pissed, this isn't working for me. And I realized it was just my judgments of the thoughts. They were allowed to be there. Basically, it was like sit and practice mindfulness. And then as you get distracted, just notice the distraction and return, like for example, return to the breath. And I was realizing I was having all these distractions. And I thought my goal was to get to a place where I didn't have the distractions any longer. So that was my judgment. I was not any better or worse at it at the end of the course.
So a lot of times, like you'll hear somebody say, I'm not good at meditation.
Yes.
And the idea is not to get good at meditation. It's like to allow a meditation practice to help you get good at life.
Yes. You don't have to be good at it. I get so distracted. I like to say to my clients that honestly, maybe a third of the time I don't finish my third cycle of breath. I just get hijacked, and next thing you know, I'm dressed and standing on the front stoop, right? It's like, what happened to me? I went on autopilot and finished. I showered and, now I'm outside. But I don't shame myself. I recognize just trying, just showing up for myself and dropping into the breath. And I'll never control whether I get distracted. Right. It's not my goal to control whether or not I have 10 distractions or 200 distractions.
Right. It's Sam Harris, who's has a waking up app and does a lot in the area of mindfulness. Always talks about the idea that you don't actually control your thoughts, or your thoughts are coming. They come at you. Right. And so the idea that you're going to meditate and you're going to have some kind of like, oh, thank God, I'm going to quiet all these thoughts. It's that you don't get attached to the thoughts. Right. And again, so if we don't get attached to the thoughts, we're able to be present, right? Which is really what we talk about the backside. And so inside that presence, we have an opportunity to think, how do I look at this in a way that's going to give me more power, right? If we're thinking about, I want to live a life above just being a contributor, but I want to be a collaborator, a partner, a co-creator, right? Where I have high energy. I believe in a safe world. I express myself in a way that we're building something together. A lot of that is that you may have an initial thought, even if you don't have you believe in safety, you think stuff still happens. And in that moment, right, we have to be aware that we're not going to allow ourselves to get hijacked, but we're going to think about how else can I look at this? How else can I frame this in a way that from that new vantage point, I see more opportunity. I see an opportunity to bring my creativity. And, that's the skill set that we're really trying to work on, right? We want to use a practice of mindfulness or meditation or visualization to set our psychology because maybe you're not the only person that had tough childhood, right? Maybe there's a lot of us did.
Yeah.
And so then we say, okay, so we're not going to just take the beliefs that were given to us. We're going to have to craft our own. And so that's a practice. That's a practice that we want to have on an ongoing basis so that we can have a better filter. But even with a great filter and even with energy, sometimes stuff comes through and you're going to have to be present in the moment and say, how else can I look at this? So talk to me about how you do that today, right? You said kind of you go into your breath. How do you reframe things, or how do you make sure you're bringing vantage points to your life so that you can find the best way of exploring something, right? Sean Aker wrote the book Before Happiness, and he talked about you want to create additional vantage points and choose the most valuable one for you, which is basically the one that gives you the greatest resources. How do you do that? What are some of the tools you use, or what's the awareness you use at that time?
One of my colleagues said a long time ago, and it stuck with me, is why is this happening for me instead of why is this happening to me? It is a pause that I take when I'm judging an experience that just came my way and I don't like it.
Yeah.
So I start by saying, I'm allowed to not like it.
Yep.
Right? I'm allowed.
Yep.
And then, why is this happening for me? Well, that's disgusting. I don't want this happening for me. I don't want this. I don't want this. So I have this little conversation with myself. And when I'm saying, why is this happening for me instead of why is this happening to me? I feel like I'm able to look at it from, everything's multifaceted. And I can just look at it as, for example, my childhood. Why did my childhood happen for me? I can find some silver linings in that. Taught me how not to parent.
Right.
Gave me some grit and resiliency. I don't know. It isn't that I would sign up for that childhood, but that childhood is reality. So now what?
Right. I'm not imagining you would sign up for the cancer, right? We don't sign up for these different challenges, but if what we do is we become resistant to them, we waste a lot of energy resistance what is real, right?
Yeah.
And so if instead we can say, okay, this is what's real, and like you said, why is this happening for me? If you look at the prism of perspective, you look at the really low levels of energy, and it's like look at victim, and it's like life happens to me, right? You look at the next three levels, and life happens by me. In other words, like I'm the creator.
Yeah.
You go up a little higher, life happens through me. And then the last one is life happens as me, right? When you're a co-creator, you're kind of in the universe and you're kind of co-creating with all of that out there. There's no resistance. It's full acceptance. And it's a belief that everything is as it's supposed to be. And all you're supposed to do is bring your best gifts, right? I'm going to bring my best gifts to the challenges and opportunities that I have. I'm going to create. I'm going to be detached from the outcomes because I don't control those. All I control is the inputs. And in that space, it really shifts how we show up. And so in that kind of that belief space, you want to think about, like, how do we think about our vantage point so that we're not resistant, but we're embracing. And then we're also thinking about, well, what gifts do I bring to this? What passions, what capabilities do I have to add to whatever the circumstance is to put it in the best place?
Right. You have to deal with it, right? It's that, how can I make lemonade out of my lemons, or whatever that saying is, right?
Right. Absolutely. And so, I appreciate, you being so open about some of the different curveballs you've had, right? And how you embrace them. And again, as a friend, we all have our curveballs, different ones. And I'm not going to, my curveballs were easier to hit than your curveballs. But over the last decade since I've known you, during that period of time, they seem to come high and fast at you. And, as a friend and, an observer, I've said, you know what, she rolled through those pretty well to put yourself in a really nice place, to put yourself in a situation where you have a job that you really enjoy, a career that you're developing, your own business that you're developing. I know that there were some additional challenges raising your son that a lot of people don't have, that you were able to kind of look at and absorb and think about, how do I put myself in a position where you thrive, where he thrives? And, you know, I just kind of want to acknowledge you in that space. And I appreciate you looking at this and sharing with us through the lens of the Prism of Perspective, how these tools can be helpful or have been helpful for you. Whatever you called them, you know, at the time, you probably didn't say, oh, I'm doing the Prism of Perspective, but you're thinking, okay, I got to build practices in my life that are going to give me energy. It does not serve me to continue to point and blame and think of the world as dangerous and be pissed at mom and dad.
It's a waste of energy. So you know, I think something everyone, or most people can relate to is, you know, maybe being cheated on at some stage in their life, right? Whether it's youthful or, you know, in the marriage or whatever. And I can either be extra pissed that someone cheated on me, for example, like be extra mad at them, or I can do the now what? This happened. I don't like that this happened. What am I going to do to continue to, you know, work my way towards happiness in a fulfilling relationship? And it might not include the person that
it might not. And what I think is important to do is at that moment, recognize, like, you know, everybody, one of the big differences, as you know, between coaching and counseling or mentoring or whatever, is the idea that the client has access to their best solution, right? And that maybe they have blind spots or limiting beliefs or whatever, but their best solution, their path forward may not be my path forward or may not be your path forward. And so one of the things I think is really cool is that situation could happen, and whatever the best solution is really up to that person, not up to us, not to judge like, oh, they took the wrong turn, I would have turned this way instead of that way. What is true is that in the moment, we want to continue to think, what's the vision that we have for our future? What are our values and what's our purpose? And how do we engage and accept some responsibility for the role that we played in creating whatever that situation is?
Right, even though we don't like it.
Yeah, at some level, we played some role in creating whatever is going on in our lives. And so if we can accept that, it gives us the power to change that. If we deny that, if we pretend as if whatever happened had nothing to do with us, if we didn't cause it, how do we have any role in fixing it? But if we accept that we played a role, now we can pivot and change. And again, my advocacy for the Prism of Perspective is just helping people realize we have an opportunity not to just accept the beliefs that were thrust upon us, but to question beliefs that don't serve us. You know, if we're living in a world where we're defining it as dangerous and there's no resources and there's no time and I have no purpose and, well, there's no energy there. So you want to step back and go, okay, how do we reframe that? How do we look at it in a way that, is that actually accurate, or is there a different way of looking at it that's going to shift my beliefs filter so I get to see more opportunity rather than I see more danger and problem, right? I want to see more opportunity.
Rinse and repeat, I said.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Over and over again.
Yeah. Do it. And then right. You know, we got to do something different there. And then the second piece is like, are your daily practices, the things that you have a choice to put into your life, are you choosing daily practices that are going to make a difference for you? Right. What we eat provides the energy that's going to determine what we can bring to the life. You know, the way that we use our bodies, the way we move, that's either diminishing our energy, right? It's turning our light down or it's turning our light up. If you want to really impact the world, you want to think, how do I turn my light up? What are the positive psychology practices I can do intentionally that impact my beliefs, right? So what can I practice every day through visualization and mindfulness and making sure you're getting proper sleep? How do you use those things that you have control of so that you can impact the beliefs that you have, the filter that you have? And then the last thing is, like, regardless of what happens in the moment, how do I look at that, stay calm, stay present, and say, how else can I look at this? Is there another way that's even more valuable to me? Is there another way that's going to give me access to more resources so that I can live the life that I want? And so that's really what we're talking about. You've done, you know, obviously you've had some curveballs thrown your way, and, you know, I think you've done a great job continuing to hit them. And what's great, as I hear you saying, is it's a process. right? It's a process that you continue to work on. It's not like, thank God, I'm just totally kicking ass on this now and I don't have to continue to pay attention, right?
No,
Right?
it's like I said, rinse and repeat, just that same thing you just articulated. Do it every time, do it daily, and then do it every time a curveball comes your way. You don't have to like it. And I think it's really important to give yourself permission, because once you do that, it feels like it's so validating.
Uh,
I like pat myself on the back when I say that. You don't have to like this,
yeah.
right? Because there's a lot of things I don't like or I don't want happening.
The
right?
other part that I think that I heard right there with you saying is you got to give yourself grace, because we're going to be imperfect at this, right? You're going to, on occasion, not say, oh, that just happened. You're going to go to a different choice, right? And so
Absolutely.
you could say, oh my God, I fell off the wagon. I'm back at the beginning. No, in that moment, you didn't have access to your greatest resources, but you become aware of it. You give yourself a lot of grace and you allow yourself to move forward. So anyway, with that, I just wanted to say thanks so much for being with me here today. Really appreciate, love you a lot, and peace out. And may the Prism of Perspective help you live an awesome life.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for everything. Thanks for inviting me. And thanks for helping me through my curveballs over the years. I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been great. Take care now, Sandy. Bye-bye.